the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Nissen, and today I am lucky enough to be joined by Geralyn Vilar. Geralyn, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Sure. I am a mother of 3 children. I'm married. I have 2 grandchildren, and I live in Florida. I live in the Villages, Florida, beautiful community here. I started writing, I started writing 3 years ago to complete this book, and I wrote a romantic mystery book. So that is where I am beginning my writing career.
Romantic mystery book. Go ahead, tell me more.
So this book is actually inspired by a true story. The trueness of the story is very small in this book. It's very much elaborated and out of my imagination, but it came from this inspiration of this young man who was wealthy by most standards. His family was wealthy, and they had a business, and they had someone come in to help them with the business. It was just the 4 of them. And when the parents died, this young man found himself homeless. Everything had been stolen and taken from him. So that was what I knew about this. And then I made this into a book with a little look back on how his parents met. So that's all the romance in the book. And then the mystery, of course, is how this happened to this young man.
It sounds intriguing. I'm going to have to hand that to you. And how has the reception been?
The reception is better than I could have ever imagined. For being my first book, I'm just so excited about having it out there. And almost everyone who's picked up this book to read it has said they could not put it down. They finished it in 1 or 2 days. It was a page turner, and they're all saying, when's the sequel coming out? We want to see what's going to happen with these characters. So I am really over the moon with this.
All right, so I understand how you got your idea, but it had to be a niggle in your head before that you wanted to write something. So let's go back to in the beginning. Did you always think you were going to write?
Well, from a young age, at least I had some ideas about writing. I was an editor for the school newspaper when I was in high school. My father actually was an editor for the paper when he was in school. And my oldest son actually has a journalism degree. So I think it probably runs in the family. But for many years, I thought about writing and I could never choose a topic, or I'd think about a topic and I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what to do with this. And then I had taken a poetry class a few years ago as part of finishing up a BSN degree. And the instructor really, really liked my poetry and encouraged me to write more. And I thought, well, maybe I should really seriously think about writing this book I've been wanting to do. And then I heard about the story and said, boy, I probably could make something out of that. I can write a book with this. And that's kind of how this developed.
So how did you come across the idea to write about this young man who has lost everything?
Someone that I know was telling me this story about them. It was somebody that they knew. And it was a very interesting story. And to think that things like this really can happen. We think this stuff is only in our imagination, that nobody's really going to take everything out from underneath you. And you're one day going to be rich and one day you're going to be living on the street. And we don't really see that as happening because it never happens to us, thank God. But when you hear a story like that, you start thinking, boy, that would make a very interesting story to write a book.
Did you have any challenges as you were writing?
My biggest challenge is I hold 4 professional licenses. I guess I'm one of these people who likes to learn. I don't know. I keep saying there's no more space up there in my brain. I need like a bigger hard drive. But the biggest challenge for me was finding the time. So it took me 3 years to write this book. And it is not going to take me 3 years to write the sequel because I won't allow it. So I'm pretty driven and motivated and really can set time aside. But the first time around was probably the most difficult with organization. And then I would put things down to focus on my other businesses. I write insurance for one thing. So right now is open enrollment. And I'm really busy at this time of year. So there's no time for me to sit down and write a book right now. So I would put things off. And then when I wanted to go back to it, I would think, okay, what chapter was I on? What was I thinking at this point? And so that made it a little bit more difficult for me.
Did you come up with a way to keep little reminders? I've heard, and I can't remember which author, some famous author, it's probably Hemingway, because everything seems to be revolving around Hemingway, that they will leave off in the middle of a sentence so that they can pick it up again and have the same idea of where they were. Did you have any habits like that?
I don't have any habits like that. And that sounds like it would be difficult, although interesting. But what I did do is I'm using a program called Scrivener. And in Scrivener, they give you areas in the program where you can write notes about different things. So what I did is I did a lot of research with the characters that I developed. For example, if the character was going out to dinner, I went and looked online for the era that I was writing about and looked for dresses. And so I would take a picture of it. I'd save that picture to my computer and I'd make a little note in one of these little notepad things about what this dress looked like or where they were going to dinner that night. So that when I did come back to it, at least I could refer to some of those things that I made little notes on.
So, Scrivener is a complicated program. I've tried to use Scrivener, but I just never fell in love with it. I like how you were describing using the little, I guess it's the corkboard portion of it where you can snap pictures and you can put them there and make yourself little notes. That's a great way to keep yourself on task. How would you recommend that people start to learn about Scrivener?
Scrivener has a tutorial. And so that was what I looked at to try and figure out how to use this. And I would have to think someone could go onto YouTube. I mean, YouTube has everything. So you probably can look at it on YouTube as well. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at it, but I actually really enjoyed writing on Scrivener. I like the fact that it separated your chapters for you. And so one of the things I did that also helped keep me on task is when I was blocked and didn't know where to go. I wouldn't say blocked, but I didn't know where to go with the rest of the chapter. And it was small and I needed more information. I just didn't know what to fill in there. I would start another chapter and just write something else. And then I'd be able to come back and see where it was going to tie into that next chapter. And then it gave me some ideas on how to expand the chapter that I was working on before.
So, do you like to read mystery stories?
Actually, no, I probably like to read more of a romance story than a mystery story.
Or did you find it complicated to write the mystery when you prefer reading the romance?
No, because it just flowed one into the other. I mean, it turned into more of a mystery, I think, than I even anticipated it would be, because I had to really build on this little tiny bit of knowledge that I had about this family. And in order to write a book out of that little tiny bit of information, two or three sentences of information, you have to start really being creative. And the creativity had to lead me down to more and more mystery to go into this book because I didn't want people to really understand what the end was going to be before they got there. Then there was no element of surprise. And of course, I don't know even what the end is for this family. So I had to create an end. You know what I'm saying? So there had to be a bit of a surprise there.
Your challenge for writing, which was that it took you a while and you have these other activities that you do on a daily basis, does that create a chaotic writing space for you? Are you able to keep it all nice and orderly?
It's not chaotic at all. And I, again, would say that with Scrivener, it's extremely orderly. To be able to write the different chapters and go back and forth between the two of them is very organized. I know people who just take out Word, for example, they open up Word on their computer and they start writing. Well, if I had to do it that way, that would be chaotic. I wouldn't even know where I was, especially if I was going from one chapter to another. It would almost be like being blindsided with things because you have no clue what's happening. But in the program I was writing in, every chapter is separate. I gave a name. Another way I did it to be organized is I actually named the chapters before I started writing, and that actually helped me write. It was an interesting way of doing it. I'd never heard about that before, but for some reason came up with it. And so every single chapter had a name and a title, and that title was specific about the chapter. So I would know where I was going to go in this story. And so if I couldn't write for three chapters because I didn't know what in the world to put there, I would skip to a chapter that I could say, okay, I can write something about this. and I would write something in that particular chapter and then go back to another one later.
What advice do you have for new writers?
I would say the biggest piece of advice I would have is to believe in yourself and just to keep moving forward. Don't worry about every little crossing every T or crossing every T or dotting every I, because you can always go back and fix that. In the beginning, I kept rereading things and trying to edit things, and it drove me crazy. And you're like, you never get anywhere when you do that because you're just going back looking at things. And someone had said to me that they had spoken to people who publish books and said, don't do as much editing, don't do that much editing, because in the end, we're going to have you edit anyway. So don't be so fixated on that. Just write the book, get the book done. So I'd say the biggest thing is get the book done, and then you can go back and fix the editing.
I'm going to agree with the fact that if you get stuck in your editing brain, then you have analysis paralysis and can't move forward.
That is so true.
What was the most valuable piece of advice that you had received as a writer?
Probably the person who told me it doesn't matter what you write, just write. And I also took a James Patterson class online, and that was something he also talked about. Write something every day. It doesn't matter what it is, just write something.
Do you have a certain time of day? Do you get up and write early?
No, because I'm so busy. I tried that. I tried to be consistent and write first thing in the morning for an hour, but that really did not work with my schedule. So for me, I just write when it's a convenient time for me to write. That could be 9:00 at night. It's whenever it is.
Yep. Geralyn, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, they can send me an email at geralynvilar@gmail.com. And if you need me to spell that, it's GeralynVilar@gmail.com.
Are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Do you have a favorite hole in the wall restaurant?
I would say up here in the Villages, that would be Little Joey's in Summerfield. It's a pizzeria restaurant, and other than New York or New Jersey, I find it's the best pizza here.
What's your favorite time of day?
Morning, because I'm more of a morning person. I can get a lot of things done very quickly in the morning.
Do you have a favorite dessert?
Oh my, that is really hard to say, but I'll say cannolis, or as an Italian way of saying it, we call them ganals. They are delicious.
Well, Geralyn Vilar, thank you so much for stopping by.
I appreciate you having me on your podcast today. I've really enjoyed this.
You all have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast. Allison out. Geralyn Vilar was born and raised in Belleville, New Jersey. Her first novel, One Spring Day, was published on March 12, 2020, and is available through Amazon.com. In 1992, she wrote and self-published a cookbook, Deliciously Low Fat, which is also available through Amazon. For more information about Geralyn, visit her at her website, GeralynVilarAuthor.com. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, visit us on the web at floridawriters.com.